Frank Capra once said, "Friend, you are a divine mingle-mangle of guts and stardust. So hang in there. If doors open for me, they can open for anyone." This is the Producers Lounge Podcast, the best podcast online for tips and tricks on producing great film, television, and web content. Welcome back for Season 3, Episode 16, hosted and produced by GreaterAndGrander.com. On this week's episode, we're chatting with Seth Needle, who has produced feature films including Daybreakers with Willem Dafoe, Fast Charlie with Pierce Brosnan, Willy's Wonderland with Nicolas Cage, and many more. We discuss growing up on horror movies, finding your passion in a specific area of filmmaking, and going from an intern at Lionsgate to an assistant to an executive at Lionsgate. Seth also pushed hard for films with Kristen Bell, Russell Crowe, Stephen King, and many others as a champion of creative talent. Here now is my conversation with Seth Needle.
How is New York? It's now the end of September. I imagine it's starting to get a little cooler.
Yeah, I was gonna say to your point about how, how's it going? Today's great. I mean, it's, the most temperate it's been in a while around here. So we have that like kind of crisp, early kind of onset of fall weather coming through. So it's beautiful. Yeah, really, really, really nice right now. I mean, it's that,
Nice.
on the East Coast, especially in the Northeast, you get like 2 weeks each way where it's beautiful. And so we're like in that, little grace period right now before it gets to be like freezing so soon. So really nice. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I know. I actually grew up in Connecticut, in
Oh,
Stamford, actually. Yeah.
that's
And,
where I'm at. I live in Stanford.
wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I'm coming to you from right now. Yeah.
Oh, crap. Nice. So you're right by the water, huh?
We are near the water. Yeah. My family actually evacuated the house to give me some silence and peace here to go down to the beach and hang out for a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm curious because I was looking at your
How fun.
bio. Looks like you grew up in Boston originally. Um, uh, assuming is that correct? I'm going off of your LinkedIn on that.
I did. Yeah. Born and raised in a suburb of Boston, went to school in Boston,
Hmm.
uh, you know, left Boston to go out to Los Angeles to start my career, realized Los Angeles wasn't for me. So I returned to Boston, was
Hmm.
able to meet my wife in Boston, and then we moved to Stanford where we are now and been there for the last, 15 plus years. Yeah. So the period where I had returned, left Los Angeles, went back to Boston, I had left the industry
Hmm.
entirely. And kind of licked my wounds a little bit, just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so at that moment, when I, luckily enough met my wife, and so as we, started thinking bigger picture and figuring out where, our path was heading, I knew I wanted to get back into the industry. And so I feel like I had, put in the time and work and set that kind of, blueprint. And so just was, not happy not being in the industry. So that's all I'll say. I knew that it's funny because at that point in time, this is 2009, 2010, the industry, to be in the industry, you still had to be New York or Los Angeles. There wasn't, an in between. And so I had done LA, didn't want to be in LA anymore, and decided that, New York City, I guess, will be it. And so at that moment, my wife and I knew that we didn't want to live in New York City. She was taking a job as a teacher in a Fairfield County town.
Hmm.
And we just kind of looked at where the train ran, the Metro North ran, and decided Stanford was the best compromise for all of it. And, literally drove down from Boston on a Sunday morning, picked a place to live, drove back up, and 3 weeks later we were living here. So it was all pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Like, I gotta say, like nowadays when I tell people like, oh, I grew up in Stanford, the one thing I hear most commonly is, oh yeah, you guys have a really great train station there. Um,
Yeah, it's funny. I wouldn't say it's great. It gets the job done. It gets you where you need to go, right? But I don't know the last time you saw it, but it's constantly under repair. So yeah, it's something. But yeah, I do not miss taking the Metro North in and out of the city, which I did for about 12 years. So uh,
nice.
yeah, it kind of veers back toward producing. Obviously,
Hmm.
my history with all of that is, as an executive producer on kind of the studio side.
Hmm.
Um, my company I am at now that I founded a couple years ago with a couple partners of mine, really purely kind of distribution, but we do dabble in some, executive producing here and there and consulting. But yeah, just to give you kind of the idea of what we're doing, if that helps shape questions for you or not. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I've got the Blue Harbor website up right in front of me actually. So, but with that being said, you grew up in Boston. What was that experience like?
I loved it. I didn't know anything else. And so yeah, it was just a great experience for me. It's very culturally rich. I grew up a very big and continue to be a very big sports fan, so that's part of the culture there. But as I got older and was able to kind of go and explore the city more and more, I got a real appreciation for the history of it all. It's so many amazing things happened there throughout the years, and so many important people, have passed through there and come from there. And yeah, just I think it was a really great mix of just beautiful place to be, a lot of history and culture to it, and some amazing schools. I was lucky to go to a high school that was just on the kind of periphery of downtown Boston, and then I ended up going to Boston University, for college. And so just, had a tough time leaving the area. So I love it. I still love going up. My family's still up there. So, I love going up there as much as I can and bringing my family there too. So it's still very much home for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. And in those years, whether it was high school or Boston University, what was the experience that you had that made you realize you wanted to get into the entertainment industry?
Yeah, so it really was not much to do with Boston, specifically, but it was just being lucky enough at one point in my life that my family bought a handheld camcorder, and for me, I started filming some things, and in parallel, I was introduced to just certain movies that got me really kind of obsessed with movies as in general, and obsessed with the medium, and so. On the one side, as that all continued on, and this is probably, when I'm 9, 10 years old. Uh,
Hmm.
on the one hand, I'm, loving just kind of filming whatever I can film, which eventually evolved into trying to create some scenes with some friends that, were obnoxious videos, and I would never want to go back and rewatch them, but it was, just us kind of screwing around. But I loved the idea of creating scenes. But in parallel, then also I grew up as a very big, horror movie nerd. So just becoming more and more obsessed with horror movies and watching as many of them as I could. And so, eventually those paths crossed, when I thought about, all right, well, I can actually go to school and do this. It's incredible. And not even knowing what that meant, though, it's like, all right, I know I can go to school and study film, whatever that meant. And so, but the point was that the paths converged, and I was lucky to go to Boston University, which had at that point a very, up and coming but established film program that I knew had an incredible internship, that had incredible internship programs that would get me where I wanted to go eventually. So it just, kind of just started the path.
That's fantastic. Out of curiosity, what was your favorite horror movies growing up?
The Shining is my favorite movie, I think, of any movie.
Oh, nice.
That's what did it for me. It's really funny. I went to the movie theaters and saw the movie Twister with my family. And there's a whole scene where like one of the tornadoes rips through a drive-in movie theater, and they're playing The Shining at that at
Oh,
that at that moment. And I'm like, at the end of that movie, at the end of Twister, I go to my dad, I'm like, what was that movie in the middle? Because it's like right at the scene when, he's hacking at the door, and they show Red Rum in the mirror. It's like incredible. And so I'm like to my dad, I'm like, what is that movie? And he told me it's The Shining. And again, at that point, I'm 10 years old. He's like, you can't watch that movie right now. It's gonna get like that of you. And I just nagged him for forever until he eventually let me see it maybe a couple of years later. And I just was so taken with it. And it's amazing because to start with a movie like that is your favorite movie, you understand you're drawn to it for so many reasons. But then as you get older and certainly I get wiser in the film industry or the filmmaking, you understand what like you know masterpiece the movie is in so many different levels. So yeah, that one just set me in motion. But kind of defaulting to being a kid from the 80s, it was like I became obsessed with just the big franchises. So I saw all the Friday the 13th movies, I saw all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, all the Halloween movies. I went through my sleepaway camp phase. It just I everything just started to really come at me, and that was me during like seventh, eighth grades into high school. I was the kid in the basement watching horror movies. So but it was The Shining that definitely just kind of kickstarted all of it. Yeah.
And I completely empathize with that. Like growing up in the 80s and 90s, like having to watch like the sanitized version with the commercial breaks you'd see on TV, but then you got to go to Blockbuster and see the real good stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to
So
your point, that was the best crash course of all was walking through the aisles of Blockbuster and just seeing the box art, and it's like understanding these are like they're these kinds of movies exist. It was always my favorite though. That was so much fun.
Absolutely. So when you got to Boston University, were there any particular professors or any particular advice that you got that really helped you better understand the industry or set a path for you? Or
I listen, all the professors I had there, I think were really great in their own rights. Once you started to get a little more hands-on with each kind of course. And so I can name names, but I don't want to miss anybody because I think, all of it really, got me where I needed to be. But what was funny, to the point I said before about not knowing,
Mhm.
what that meant to go to school for film, in my head, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go to film school and make movies. Yeah, that's what it is, right? And so, I went through intro courses, and then I remember vividly taking a film production 201 course my sophomore year, and we were shooting on Bolexes, editing on Steenbecks. Like, you were really getting hands on. It was really awesome. But I realized during all of that, it just wasn't for me. I did not love doing that as much as I was like, had a ton of passion going into even that specific course to be making movies and getting hands on with all this. I just realized it really was like, it was, I don't have the right mindset to tell you. It just didn't feel right, And so, um, in parallel, again, because the school was so strong and had such great, courses and kind of variety, I was taking film studies courses too. And so there were a handful that I just really loved because you're watching movies and you're studying movies and you're getting film theory, you're understanding, just how these things came to be and kind of, all of the big messages and thinking behind them. And so, I just, I kind of loved the idea of studying films. And so I trended a lot more that way in the final couple of years that I was there. And so yeah, I mean that is how I kind of went through the few years that reigned after the I don't want to say failed production course. It was a really great course, and I made some pretty funny movies I'm still somewhat proud of. But like just it definitely like kind of ended that path I was going down. But the point is, all of that put me on or got me in some sort of mindset for like, all right, well, I don't know what I want to do with film, but I still want to be in the industry somehow, and we'll figure out what that means. Maybe it's just being on set. Maybe it's maybe it is just, I don't even know what at that point. I know now what I could have done, but at that moment when I'm 20 years old, I don't know. So, but the beauty again of why Boston University was so important to me was that they had internship programs that were putting students out in LA and Sydney to go work in the industry. And I knew that
Wait, did you say Sydney, like Sydney, Australia?
I did. Yeah, it was
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
incredible. Yeah. I and luckily enough, I was on a path in college where I was going to be able to graduate a little bit early. And so for me, it was like, why not just go to LA? Let's get out to LA. I know that that's where I need to be. Let's just get out there as soon as I can and, start putting in the work. And so that was ultimately what got me out there. I went out to Los Angeles my first semester of my senior year, and was put into an internship at Lionsgate. And just, from there it was off to the races. I was in the industry. And so, yeah, I mean, BU was amazing for having all those connections and steering students in these directions and getting them where they need to be. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So a lot of people like will wait to get uh their first real experience at a production company until sometimes after they graduate. I
Right.
still meet a lot of students who make that mistake of like, oh, I'm not going to do any internships. I'm just going to focus on like as much as I can and then I'll get a job. But you were able to get an internship at Lionsgate it sounded like your first semester of senior year and then I assume transition into a paid assistant role there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I started as an intern in the acquisitions department,
Hmm.
which, taking a step back, I had no idea what that meant. And once I got there and the person managing interns explained to me that I'm going to be reading scripts and watching movies and giving my thoughts on these things, I'm like, this is a job. My mind, and it was one of these things because I was so laser focused on, on the production side of things and never really got that far into, nor did I take any courses at BU if they existed. I don't remember on the business side of things, and producing and the business side and all that. It just was, it really blew my mind. And so, yeah, once I got there and was however long into the internship, I just realized, I'm like, this is exactly what I want to be doing. Like I to the point I made before, I knew I didn't want to be making movies anymore. I knew how to make movies. I didn't want to make them. I took a bunch of film studies courses. I understood the process and the thought and the theory, all of it. And so all of that really just kind of crafted or sculpted me to be able to do that job. And so, yeah, I interned at, I did a semester as an intern in the acquisitions department. Um, everyone in my internship program went back to school, but I was done, so I stayed. Kind of, tugged at the skirts of everyone that was working, my bosses at Lionsgate, and said, "I'm not going back. Can I do something else here? Just let me work here." And because the department had new interns coming in, and so I got hired, on literally minimum wage to be what they called at that point was a floating intern. And so I just went to whatever department in the company needed me that day. And I just kind of filled in, helped out, whatever. And it was awesome because I got to see how every other department in that studio, was running and what they were doing and how it all came together. It also proved to me that I didn't want to do any of that other stuff either. I wanted to be back in the acquisitions department. So I basically just, one day begged my bosses that I had been working for in the acquisitions department to let me stay. They kind of just let me stay, and eventually they hired me. I think I probably interned and then was a floating intern, for 6 to 7 months, and then I got hired and was an assistant in the acquisitions department for the next 2.5, 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And being a floater is actually quite common in the industry too. For those who are listening who need the context, a lot of times if you get a position at like a top 5 or top 10 agency, you will start basically out of the mailroom and be a floater assistant, kind of going from desk to desk, learning as much as you can from each one before you finally, if you're lucky and if you're good, actually get assigned to a desk permanently. So what was Lionsgate like in general?
I loved it. When the moment I got there, they, just kind of looking at what Lionsgate was, 40,000 foot view at that point,
Mhm.
they were no longer, the small independent company, that they that they were at the onset, but they had acquired a merge with Artisan a few years before I got there. And they were into when I started there, I think it was the second or third Saw movie had just come out. So they had, and they had Tyler Perry, they had very legitimate franchises that they were building, but they were still a smaller independent company. They weren't, a mini. They're definitely not what they are today. They
Mhm.
were, they were becoming a mini major, but they weren't there. So, you'd go there and you come in every day, and you'd still have that feeling of like, it was us against the world, and like, we're making really good movies. But it wasn't, a studio where one person did one small job, and it's like the office space of it all. It's like, what do you do here? Like everyone was doing everything. And so I loved it. It just was a really great time to be there. And during the about 3 years I was there, they went through just incredible change and scale. And a few years into it, they merged with Mandate International. And then they were toward the end of my run, they were bringing in the Hunger Games. So it's like from where I started to where they were heading, it just was, the scale was incredible. And but yeah, I mean, I look back and think back, my at least first 2 years are so fondly, because I was afforded so many awesome opportunities and was able to do so many cool things as a 21 and 22-year-old kid that, yeah, most kids on a desk as an assistant, aren't lucky enough to go do. I got to go to film markets. I was at Sundance in 2007 or 2008. I went to I went to some other festivals. I'm just trying to think what it was, like back when Los Angeles Film Festival was a thing. Like I went to that every year. So I was covering screenings on behalf of the company. I was taking meetings. I was really getting exposed to a lot of things there. Again, that someone as an assistant normally isn't doing in a studio. So I loved my time there. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And it does sound like like a lot of assistants will kind of, from what I've seen, from what I know, they will kind of take a step back and just wait for the industry to happen to them. But you were like taking the go-getter approach of like proactively going to these festivals and kind of scouting like exciting new films that were coming out.
I
So
was trying to, as much as they would let me, because again, it was still a hierarchy, and your bosses are the ones doing everything, and so you definitely aren't not trying to overstep and piss them off, but yeah, I was able to do a lot of really cool things, and unfortunately, as I said, the company grew larger and became more of a studio and more corporate. Then I was kind of, the things that I was able to have been doing the years before were, I don't want to say taken away, but just not as available to me. And so that's when it was like, well, I had the taste. I didn't want to go just then be an assistant on a desk answering calls and such. And so that's when I made the decision, to leave. But yeah, to your point, I'm proud of myself for, being as proactive and using the opportunities in front of me as I could. I mean, there's obviously the whole, evaluation part of it where I was at film markets and some film festivals, but watching a bunch of movies, but I was also really dedicated to meeting as many people as I could, having drinks, meetings, lunch, whatever, with meals, with other assistants, with executives, just trying to be a sponge, but also grow the network, which became super, super important to me later on. So, um,
Mhm.
advise any intern I had in all the years after that, take as many meetings as you can, know as many people as you can. You might not appreciate it in the moment. It might take 10 years, but that will all come back to be incredibly rewarding for you. And so, so yeah, I feel like I really, I did a really good job for myself with the time that I was out there. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And then after you'd left Lionsgate, where did you go from there? What sparked your interest? I've got your LinkedIn in front of me, but I'd rather hear from
Yeah.
your own inter
Of course. So I was done with Los Angeles at that point. I feel like it wasn't a fit for me for a lot of reasons. My family's all East Coast and really just, back in Boston. The friends that I had out there in Los Angeles, everyone's working hard and I was working very hard, not seeing a lot of friends. And so I just, the combination of all it kind of made me feel like I was burning out. And that's not a feeling I think I wanted to have at 22.
Mm,
So I decided painfully to give up the job and leave Los Angeles entirely to go back home. And
mm,
was in Boston, so um, I left and drove cross country back to Boston with a friend of mine, and spent like the next year and a half in living in kind of again like a suburb of Boston with some friends of mine. It was a great time. Got to just kind of like recharge the batteries a bit. As I said before, I met my now wife, which was amazing. Um, and so to your question, I was taking just a bunch of jobs to try to make ends meet.
mhm,
I was lucky early on from when I moved back. I found a job at a company called MarketCast, which went through a bunch of different ownership changes. At one point, they were owned by Penske Media. I
mm,
forget where they are now, what's happening with them, but essentially they were a marketing consultant that was hired to analyze trailers and TV spots and commercials and such. They did a lot of just kind of like recruited screenings and took a lot of data and were able to then kind of transcribe that and analyze it on behalf of studios to say to X studio, hey, uh trying to think of someone who's I was looking at, it was like, right around like 2010, 2011, just some of those movies. But like looking at like Family Fair and be like, all right, well, the studio, audiences were responding to these moments, let's
mhm.
really play that up in the next spot. Or they hated when that person said this, so let's get that out of there. And I found it fascinating. It was a really great opportunity to see that side of things and understand consumer thinking. Um, Now, and what's funny about MarketCast, that was a satellite office in Boston just because the woman that was running that office didn't want to live in Los Angeles. And so they built an office for her and had a little staff for her. And so was super lucky to be able to find that and work for her. And she really did well by me. I was really happy to have her support. And so I was able to work there for a number of years, even after I did kind of move away from Boston again. But I really loved that company and what they did. But that was essentially like a part-time job. So in addition to doing that, I was writing and I was just honestly don't even remember most of it. It just was, kind of odd jobs. But it just got to a moment where, they started, we said back beginning when we met, but you know, I I knew that I wanted to be back into the industry. It just kind of hit me one moment where I'm like, this is fine, but I had moved a lot. I went to film school. I had moved to Los Angeles. I made this incredible network. I know what I know. Like I had like broken through, which is the toughest thing for most people to do, and I wasn't utilizing it. And so, I had a talk with my wife, and she's amazing. She's a teacher. She was able to, kind of, pick up and move. And we decided, all right, let's go down to New York City and figure it out, or try to work in New York City and figure it out. And obviously, we live in Connecticut, but yeah, at that point, it was, all right. I had kind of done everything I was able to do in Boston, and was sad to leave it again, but obviously it's been the right move. And so yeah, it's about 15 years ago.
You mentioned something really interesting earlier, which was, you were making movies specifically at Boston and back at Boston University, and you realized that that particular kind of vibe of making movies wasn't for you. And it actually reminded me of something that my mentor or one of my mentors, Nima Barnett, she was a professor of mine at USC, and she said, when you actually get on set, it doesn't feel like art. It feels like construction. And so where somebody is in the entertainment industry really affects the vibe. Like working in development and in an office is very different than working freelance as a writer versus working on set versus working in post versus working in acquisitions at the tail end of the pipeline. And it really is important for people to find kind of the vibe that works best for them. I found when I went to film school, a lot of people kind of just assumed like, oh, I want to go into being on set. That's where the action is. But in reality, not everybody wants to work 14-hour days on a construction site 6 or 7 days a week. It can burn you out. The other thing you mentioned that I just want to pick up on is you had said that you had broken through and you weren't utilizing it. And I feel that that's really important for people who are kind of trying to figure out what their own strategy is for how they entered the entertainment industry. What did broken through really mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to a couple of things, right? It's
Yeah.
tough to get that first job. I was lucky enough that my school got me an internship at a place that I wanted to work. And, I took the reins from there and worked my ass off and connected with the people I needed to connect with to get the job.
Mm.
But getting your first job in the industry is really challenging, especially if it's going to be, at a company, something like Lionsgate. And to that point, then, as I said, I spent 3 years building up a network. I knew a lot of people. I understood the job. I was starting to understand the industry more. So, breaking through to me means getting, your foot in a door and establishing yourself. And that might mean a lot of different things, but essentially, you're Seth Needle. I used to work at Lionsgate. I can say that. That's a real thing on a resume that means something. And I can lean on my network saying, all right, well, if I need to go find a project, a job, whatever, I can kind of lean on this person who connects me to this person and so on. Um, so yeah, when I'm working in Boston, not in the entertainment industry, all of that was kind of for nothing, and so and I know, and I had seen firsthand how challenging it is for people to get, a fraction of what I was able to do and experience, in those years. And so yeah, I feel like I was letting myself down by not leaning on it. And certainly, as kind of a message to anyone listening, it's, I would say this to my interns in my previous job as much as I could. It's like, to the point of getting yourself in the door, take whatever comes your way, like it might not be the thing that you want or where you end up, but the idea of getting your foot in the door, find a way into some place and understand what that means and take it from there. But it's all about just, getting over that initial hump and finding some landing spot to then take advantage of it however you want. So that's ultimately, yeah, what I was talking about.
I agree with that 100%. And I actually say to interns now who come in and intern for Greater and Grander, like, yeah, don't let your preconceived notions about who you want to be prevent you from becoming the person you're going to be. Um,
Absolutely.
um,
That's really smart advice. Yes.
yeah, I have a good one every once in a while. And then Screen Media Ventures came about. How did that happen?
Yeah, so right back to the point I was making, when I decided to move out of Boston and down to Connecticut now and try to find a job in the city. Ironically enough, I was going back out to LA for a wedding for one of my best friends and took the time to meet that at that point to meet with my old bosses or my bosses that were at Lionsgate. Told them I was trying to get back into the industry. They said, they were super supportive. They said, great, talk to these three people. These are connections I have out there. And so when I went back home after all that, reached out to those people. And for the next month, it became I met with those people, they recommended these people. Those people recommended these people. And I just met so many people. And just through that continued networking, one person said, hey, a person I know at Screen Media is looking for somebody, to be an assistant, but it's a small company. And so, you might be doing a lot more. And so took a meeting at Screen Media, within the next couple of weeks. Yeah, and they needed help kind of in a lot of areas. And team wasn't super big, and I personally didn't know a lot about them, but they had been around at that point for, going on about 20 years. And, I saw an opportunity. They wanted someone to do acquisitions, and they loved the resume that I had, both coming from Lionsgate, but having kind of a marketing, angle and all of it. And so yeah, I started as an acquisition, or I'm sorry, I started as an assistant at Screen Media, I think in 2011. It sounds right. Yeah, in that range.
Oh, wow. And then over the next 12 years, you grew your position from assistant to EVP of Global Acquisitions and Co-productions. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
that,
it seems a little surreal, when you say it like that. It was honestly it was great timing. The company was trying to reinvent itself a bit. They were trying to understand how to scale. They wanted to work in kind of larger pictures. And when I say larger, when I started there, they were releasing movies. This is kind of dated. They were releasing movies direct to video, and DVD sales, physical media sales were like their bread and butter. And they were putting out, I don't know, maybe 12 movies a year, and all their revenue was coming from, let's say 90% of the revenue was coming from physical media sales, and the other 10% were coming from the output deal they had with Netflix. And everything else just was not really, part of their financial model. And so I needed to, immerse myself back in the industry. I needed to understand acquisitions a little bit more because to that point it was really more, an evaluation versus me having any of the business acumen for it. And so, let's say over the next like 2 or 3 years after I started, I just really took it as I like to do, took advantage of the opportunity and was meeting so many people and going to all of the major film festivals, all the major film markets, and just trying to, you know, find films for us to work on. And luckily enough, yeah, I mean, the company was believing more and more that there's room to grow, there's more revenue to be made. And at that moment in time, too, from the industry perspective, was when um, the transactional VOD business was starting to really boom, on digital platforms, and day and date releasings when the movies were coming out in theaters at the same time as they were available on digital platforms, and with that, they're available for a premium price, and they got better, marketing, better promotion on platforms. That all was, at the exact moment. And so I was, lucky enough to have smart people that worked with me to understand that, and we started just being a little bit more bullish, and taking a little bit more risk on the types of movies that we were going to go acquire, and spending a little bit, making larger commitments to movies. And really from the period of 2013 and on, screen media was able to become a very desired and strong part of the independent distribution landscape. And I like to believe I had a big part of that, as did the other executives there with me. And we're able to really grow the company over the next 4 or 5 years. And then it was eventually sold. It was a privately owned company, and it was eventually sold to Chicken Soup for the Soul, who started an entertainment division. But during those the years previous to that sale, it was a lot of fun. We worked on a lot of really great movies, and there was a lot of passion to just be a player.
Hey everyone, quick break here. If you listen to the Producers Lounge podcast, you know I'm obsessed with how stories get made and who gets to make them. That's why I wrote Threads of Imagination, a book about collaborative storytelling and the art of building worlds together. Published by DSTL Arts nonprofit, which supports young BIPOC artists, the book pulls from my own personal history and even from my family history and the tradition of itinerant tribes telling stories around the campfire. Threads of Imagination is a guide to collaborative storytelling and how ideas grow, evolve, and become something bigger when people create together. Whether you're a filmmaker, writer, artist, or just someone who loves the process behind good stories, this book gives you practical tools, creative prompts, and real-world insights to elevate your craft. That's right, Threads of Imagination is full of exercises, behind-the-scenes lessons, and inspiration to help you create with purpose and community. If you're looking to jumpstart your next project or sharpen your storytelling instincts, this is the place to go. You can find Threads of Imagination wherever books are sold online. All right, back to the Producers Lounge podcast.
so you are at Screen Media Ventures,
But yeah, and at that moment the company really wasn't doing that type of setup. They were more focused on acquiring films that were completed. And that was, their monetization strategy versus being involved in any type of production and having production risk, with what they were trying to do. But yeah, clearly we can get into it, as the company went on, because, after Screen Media was sold, and that was in 2017, early 2018, the appetite for the parent company, then Chicken Soup for the Soul, to bring in larger scale content, take on more risk, all of that, that was it grew, and that was really where they wanted to head. Our mission in those years was to generate as much revenue as we could for the company. So find larger productions, larger pictures, that movies that we knew were going to generate a lot more revenue for the company. And so we started at that point to really, be involved more and more in a co-production capacity where we were finding scripts, talking to producers, putting up financial commitments that became part of financial plans for producers to have their movies greenlit.
Got it. And during that time from when you started in 2011 to 2018, then how did you put, because everyone thinks like, oh, it's Hollywood and they think it's kind of an amorphous box. But like working your way up the corporate ladder to more of an executive level is like it's also a skill set. And I'm wondering what were some of the ways in which you positioned yourself within the company to say like, oh, I am a trustworthy individual to pick high quality projects for you to invest literally millions of dollars in. How did that come about?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny because to paint the picture a little bit more, there wasn't like during those years you mentioned that I had there were like kind of defined departments, and I had two or three bosses ahead of me in the acquisitions department.
Mhm.
Media at that moment, there was a president, a woman who ran all of the films division, myself, a person that was kind of operations slash marketing, and then we had some other people on the periphery that were doing social media and operations and so on. And so in terms of kind of like the team, it was three of us strategizing on the content evaluation. The larger company had other departments. Obviously, I mentioned the international sales department, and there was a kind of a digital department and so on. But in terms of like the films division, it was really just like the three, maybe four or five of us doing all of it. But to your point, it all of that came in time. It started with me being a little bit more green on the business side of things and knowing how to evaluate movies, but not being as skilled in negotiating or deal structure. And as I just immersed myself and really showed that I wanted to run point on doing all of it, that's when confidence in the company grew. And I quickly became, it wasn't an assistant, I became like the manager of acquisitions, however long into my tenure there. And then I was the director of acquisitions maybe a year later. And then eventually things, from 2015, when the person that was running division retired, it was myself and one other person running all of the films division. At that point, I became an SVP. And so it just became, that we were finding movies that were successful. We weren't losing the company money. And if anything, we had a number of movies that just on paper were massive successes, financially for the company. And so the powers that be, there was a CEO of the company, there was an EVP who kind of oversaw everything else. They trusted myself and the people that were doing the job there implicitly. And so it just became kind of de facto that, all right, these guys know what they're doing, and titles were what they were. It didn't really, really matter. It's just like, hey, they're the content team. They're gonna go figure this out and get it done. We just, we know we want to be doing X, Y, and Z. Go figure it out, guys, and keep us updated, which was awesome. It was a really great structure there. Yeah.
Let's talk about a little bit of deep dive. What were a couple of the projects that were kind of your proudest accomplishments while you were at Screen Media Ventures?
Yeah, it is. There's kind of two chapters to it, right? It's like the pre-acquisition by Chicken Soup and the post, because we were not not as strongly funded, and so you had to be smarter about the acquisitions in terms of what you could commit to financially and what the release strategy and spends are and all of that. And so it just was kind of a different scope when you look at the movies we were releasing pre 2018 and post 2018. But pre 2018, there were a number that I was really, really happy to have been involved with. We did a movie called The Lifeguard, which starred Kristen Bell, which played Sundance in 2013. That same year, we did a movie called COG, which was the first adaptation of a David Sedaris work starring Jonathan Groff. The next year, we worked on a Stephen King project that he wrote the script for and did a ton of promotion for, which was amazing. Get to meet him and hang out with him for a couple of days. But it was called Stephen King's A Good Marriage.
Okay, you gotta give me a little more detail. What's it like to hang out with Stephen King for a couple days?
Yeah, right. I know. It's yeah. Awesome. Super nice guy. Was so relatable, so down to earth, just, ready to support and chat. But he did a whole day of press at a hotel in the city. I was lucky enough to go with him. He was on Seth Meyers that night, so I got to go with him and our publicist over to, to have him on the show. And he was super accommodating to Seth, and just was really funny, and supported the movie really well. So just an awesome guy, super relatable, super approachable, and one of those guys that I probably could have sat down and talked to for however long. It was definitively a full circle moment for me, as they said it before, because The Shining, right? So but I kind of fanboyed a little bit and tried to stay as professional as I could, but it was amazing. It really was amazing. And it is the beauty and kind of just uniqueness of this space. It's like you end up working with and hanging out with people that you've watched on screen, or read interviews about, or studied for so long. So it's pretty awesome, but you also have to be professional. You have to figure out, where's the line? How can I like be a fanboy but also do my job here? Well, and so what's funny to that comment though is that where Screen Media did a really good job in the subsequent years prior to the 2018 sale, where we worked with a lot of actor directors. So actors that were making their directing debut, or directing a movie for their second or third time, whatever that might be. But we saw it as a really incredible marketing tool, because we know that that person's going to be out there supporting the hell out of their movie. They're going to do everything and anything to make sure they're getting messages out there to see your movie. Whereas unfortunately, a lot of time you'll work on a movie, acquire a movie, and it could, because it's a really bad example because Kristen was great, but it's like you acquire a movie with Kristen Bell, and Kristen Bell then isn't available. So it's like, all right, well, where's the support for that movie then, right? And again, she was awesome for the Lifeguard, so not saying anything about her specific, just kind of the example. But so working with actor directors was awesome. So we, in those in from 2015, 2016, that range, we worked with Helen Hunt on a movie that she directed called Ride. We worked with Chris Messina on a movie he directed called Alex of Venice. And there are more, but now I'm going to draw a blank. But there were at least two or three others that we did, where we worked with Ryan Eggold on a movie called Literally Right Before Aaron. And so just all of these people were awesome to deal with. Super smart, great filmmakers, but super supportive of their movies. And so we had a blast. It was just a really great time to be working on those movies. And then after 2018, like I said, it was, we were working on much more, kind of profile, larger movies that like my dad would have heard of, So during that period, we were lucky enough to work with Rod Lurie on his movie, The Outpost, which was it was the most financially successful movie that the company ever put out. But that's the movie about a stranded troop in the war in Afghanistan, where they basically are just left by themselves to fight off kind of an attack on all sides, because they're stuck in this kind of like bottom of this like ravine. And so
Was that the
and
one
it's
with Mark Wahlberg? Or
not with more. It's Scott Eastwood, Orlando Bloom, and Caleb Landry Jones. And it's a true story. Like these guys really fought off the Taliban, when they had a small platoon against hundreds, of them coming at them. And just an incredible movie, incredible tale. And so yeah, that one, is definitely the proudest, that myself and my partners that at my company now that worked with me at Screen Media too at that moment are also, so honored to have worked on. But that's a big one. We also released a documentary about how Sesame Street was created. And it went on to win.
that's one is Street Gang, how we got to Sesame Street.
Yes, correct. Yes. HBO, we brought it out initially in theaters and to digital platforms, but HBO had it kind of then premiere on their channel later in the year, and it won an Emmy for them. So it was a really profile movie, and just awesome to be involved with all that. Getting to work with this, with the workshop and all of it, just was really cool. But yeah, during that whole period, I was able to co-produce probably 15 or so movies, and we were just working on a lot of really awesome movies, and devising really smart release strategies and campaigns for them. So it was a really awesome time to be there for for a few years after the sale. Yeah.
One question before we move on to Blue Harbor. One of the projects you're credited as executive producer on is Willy's Wonderland, which was produced by friend of the show, Jeremy Daniel Davies, and starring Nicolas Cage. What was that experience like?
I left Willy's Wonderland off, and because I figured we'd talk about it, but that's definitively one of my favorite experiences. Working at Screen Media and working with Jeremy and Grant, the producers, was incredible. Yeah, that was the one. That's a project where I was the most involved with throughout its entire life, more than any other film at Screen Media. I got wind of the movie, and I forget even how. And I didn't know the producers directly, but Screen Media had recently bought Foresight Unlimited, which was run by Mark Damon. And Mark knew at least Grant Kramer pretty well, and he put us in touch. And they sent us over the script. At that point, it was still kind of early stage. I tore through it the day that I got it and thought it was one of the most interesting, special scripts that I had read in a long time, if not ever. It was like it spoke to me both commercially as an executive, but creatively. I'm like, this is why I'm in movies. This is why I'm in the industry. Um, and it was, yeah, and Nick was kind of loosely attached at that point. I think at that moment he said two words in the entire script, which I'm like, that's amazing. And I loved the idea for it. It was sure there was, Five Nights at Freddy's was something that was already out there, but this was just so uniquely different that I'm like, I think this could be really, really special. And so, kind of pleaded with the powers that be at the company, like, we need to be involved with this. And luckily I had built enough credibility at that point that they're like, we believe in you, let's go do this thing. And so essentially the company fully financed the picture. And I worked very closely with the producers, from script stage all the way through the end of it to help bring it to screen. And it turned out really, really strong and really great. And I have a very very fond memories of that. I was able to go to set a few days and hang out with those guys, and we had really great collaborative meetings and conversations throughout the whole process. And the movie was ultimately released kind of in the waning stages of the pandemic, but that meant that it was still a period where so many people were home watching movies that we were able to release it digitally, in kind of an aggressive manner where it was promoted well, but at a higher price point, and the movie sold incredibly well. And we were also able to put it in drive-through movie theaters, and it did incredibly well for what theatrical success meant at that moment in time. So to be able to be involved with a movie like that creatively, but also have it be a financial hit for the company was great. And I love those guys. Jeremy's awesome. I saw the news on the show before. He's just a smart, passionate dude. I had a really great time meeting and working with him.
Yeah, fantastic guy, really cool, really down to earth.
Absolutely.
And then in 2023, you leave Screen Media Ventures to found Blue Harbor. How did that process come about? Like, what was the impetus?
Yeah. So I'll be minimal in it, but unfortunately, Screen Media and more so its parent company went bankrupt and it went under last year.
That's a pretty good reason to leave. Yeah.
Yeah. But so that happened last year. Myself and my two partners, so my partners Mike Messina and Amanda Sherwin at Blue Harbor, they were senior executives at Screen Media as well. Mike was running all of distribution. Amanda was running all of the marketing and PR efforts. And myself, I was overseeing all acquisitions and co-productions. Point is, we early 2023, we saw that things were going to get bad. And we decided that it was the right time for us to leave. And yeah, we wanted to work together still. We were all close friends, and we complement each other very well. So we left. We kind of like jumped off, and just said, let's go figure this out. We knew we wanted to create we wanted to work together. We wanted to create a distribution company. But what we do different at Blue Harbor, just to state it overall, is that we're a distribution company that works on a for hire model. So like we're a service-based distribution company. Idea being, filmmakers hire us, pay us a fixed fee to be their distribution company. They also fund their release. And we as executives use the infrastructure we've built, all the accounts that we have, the knowledge and relationships that we have to go devise, craft, and execute release strategies on behalf of the filmmakers. But they're doing everything with us. It's everything we're doing is at their approval. And ultimately, because we are paid a fixed fee to do our business, we are not participating in revenues that we generate. So we're passing back all the revenue that we earn, for the movies we're on in full to the filmmakers. So I say all that just because, to give context, at that moment in time with us starting Blue Harbor, you take a look at the landscape from the independent side, and unfortunately, with my previous company going under, they were bringing three separate independent distribution companies down with it, and there were other companies going under, and so the landscape was just becoming minimized. So if you're a filmmaker, and we've heard this is really how we got the impetus to go the way we did, but if you're a filmmaker at that moment, there are fewer options available to you to go bring your movie to. And unfortunately, the companies that exist know there are fewer options. So the deal terms they're offering were getting more and more egregiously in their favor. And to boot, the relationship between distributor and filmmaker, we kept hearing, was just getting worse and worse, where filmmakers are delivering their movie and they're not hearing another word from the distributor until it's out. And so that was never the way that the three of us did our business at Screen Media. We always, to the point I said before, wanted to work with the filmmakers we're working with, but have them be part of the team, be collaborative, be as transparent as we could. These guys were making movies and putting years and years of life, of their lives into these things, and financially they're super invested in it. And so, for us, it never made sense to say, well, we know better, don't talk to us, let's just do our job. Why not be as collaborative as we could? So all of that's to say, we built Blue Harbor to support filmmakers, to be an alternative to that challenging independent space, where maybe you don't even get an offer, but if you do, it might be equivalent of just signing your copy right away, because, who knows, what participation you're going to have, with the release or financially. So that, again, long-winded way, but that's ultimately, that's ultimately what Blue Harbor is, and that's why we built it the way we did, and we've been in business now a little over 2 years.
And I want to talk about kind of the state of the industry, because as you've mentioned, like a lot of there's been a complete shuttering of a lot of distribution avenues, both corporate ones and independent ones. At the time we're recording this, they're talking about there's talk about an additional merger with Skydance Paramount with Warner Brothers, and that's going to affect their online streaming. There are independent distributors shuttering. There's even discussions that Disney is going to shut down Hulu within the next 12 to 18 months. So there really is a less and less distribution avenues out there in terms of creating a viable business model for films. And in fact, I'll share with you an experience I had. So I directed I've line produced, of course, but I actually directed my first feature last year called Unfriendly Fire, and talking with a bunch of different distribution avenues. And what I've found is if you don't get into one of the top 7 or top 10 Class A film festivals, at least I've heard them referred to as Class A, and they're all items that people listening to the podcast would recognize purely by name: Cannes, Sundance, Slamdance, Tribeca, etc. If you don't get into one of those film festivals, you're kind of SOL and JWF, you know? And so I was actually approached by one distributor, but their offer was, and I will not mention them on the podcast. I'll tell you if you want, and cut it out later. But they said, "Hey, we're interested in acquiring your film. We want a 25-year license and we have to recoup all of our costs, a minimum of $30,000, and we're not going to tell you what goes into that $30,000, and that we're not going to have any transparency into what we are spending." And that's bullshit, in my opinion.
Not interesting to you?
No, not really. No. And so there are a lot of opportunities out there, like Film Hub, for just independent filmmakers to just upload, and then maybe that through that they'll get on a bunch of smaller distribution channels. I actually uploaded a 25-minute short that got onto like decent, it got onto like the official Roku channel and stuff like that. And for people who are not aware of like Film Hub and other websites like that, you upload your program, you upload your artwork, and then 9 months later you start getting checks from them if you make any sales. But there are also a lot of distribution companies like yourself that are upfront fees for filmmakers. And so just looking at the state of the industry, I want to ask, like, what are the best options for filmmakers? And also on another level is, what does Blue Harbor bring to the table that, say, like a filmmaker would not get from Film Hub, or giving away their 25-year license with no no payments until $30,000 had been recouped. So
yeah. So yeah, we like to say there are macro issues in the industry, and it's really challenging to fix those at any given moment. We founded and started Blue Harbor to help identify and solve some of the micro issues, as we're talking through here, where how can filmmakers get their movies out there to be seen and supported, and feel supported, but right, I don't have the solution to having consumers rent more movies, or spend more in the industry. That's going to be something that's going to always be fluid, but we're bullish because we think the industry is always going to be there to some degree. It's just a matter of being smart and adaptive to what's happening, and ideally a little bit more proactive than reactive, and find new ways to do it. So yeah, I mean, I just want to hit on your point about the film festivals for a second. We're big supporters of film festivals and having, festivals be part of your strategy. Yeah, obviously, if a movie is able to get into kind of a top tier festival, um, that's great, and that does probably afford it more opportunity than not. But I will say, festivals like Toronto accept 300 movies, and 300 movies aren't acquired out of that festival,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily always translate. I think if you have a solid movie that you've made and you have an audience in mind, those are the most important factors out of the gate. Yeah, of course, any executive is going to tell you, oh, you should have some cast. Oh, it's great to have, it be some type of genre movie. That's always the formula for acquisition executives. All right, well, we're looking for cast and genre. But for me, it's like, the most important thing is going and making the best movie that you can go make and knowing who your audience is. Who ultimately, did you make the movie for yourself? Okay, fine. If that's the case, understood. That's understandable. But understand that that's going to impact commerciality or in finances later on. But if you're making it for an audience that you think you can go cultivate, then that's going to lead to a lot more success more often than not. And obviously, if you can layer in cast, genre, etc., then even better. But don't think just because you don't have cast or genre that the movie is doomed, or if you don't get into Sundance, the movie has no chance. There is a lot of opportunity. Now, to the state of the industry, especially on the independent side, things are tougher right now. What's made things really challenging on the independent side is that they were able to rely on places like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Starz, etc., to pay them a license fee to take the movie that they're working on, after the theatrical release and after the digital release. And that license fee, can be pretty substantial for certain movies, if any of those platforms really want the movie. And so that guaranteed revenue, as anyone's acquiring that movie, knowing it's coming back, just alleviates a lot of the pressure and concern for those independent companies, to make whatever financial commitment they're going to make to those movies. Now, with the state of the current licensing, I guess the current licensing landscape, those places just are not acquiring as much content. They're not licensing as much content. You mentioned Hulu. It's like, they're just kind of being rolled up into the mothership, and it's unclear what their, initiative for independent films going to remain to be. They're right now, it's great. They're still supporting, but they're, it's definitely more, trending toward corporate than it was several years ago. So point is, I say all that, the lack of licensing or the reduced amount of licensing has impacted these independent companies who are just unwilling to take more and more risk. So anything that's not kind of a straight shot down the fairway, in terms of genre, cast, commerciality, it's just not a risk that most independent companies are wanting to take right now. And so, that is leading to, fewer offers, worse offers, offers like what you're seeing, where it's like, how are they going to impact their bottom line? They're going to take the movie for a lot longer. They're going to charge a lot higher distribution fees. They're going to try to participate in the back end to a much more egregious favor. Yeah, to your point, they're putting a minimum amount of costs that they're going to recoup, versus recouping what they're actually spending. What if they only spent 10 grand? So by that deal in that contract, they get to recoup another 20 grand of what? Who knows? And with transparency, you're gonna have no idea. So all of that, is why we think what we're doing right now at Blue Harbor is a solution, not the solution or the only solution, right? It's a solution where, yes, there is a premium that comes with what we're offering, that filmmakers have to pay a little bit more for their distribution. But what's coming with something like what we offer, and I can speak to Film Hub too, is that you're getting guaranteed distribution. You have a go-to-market strategy versus filmmakers making movies and telling their financiers, our go-to-market strategy is we're going to go to a festival and we're going to sell it. What happens when that? Okay, great, but when that doesn't happen, no, right? So what we're trying to do is build a guarantee in there, and we think there's a lot of value in bringing someone like us on earlier and earlier, that you're building the distribution strategy into your production budget, so that when you're raising money to release, to make your movie, distribution's part of that whole plan. And then that you can go from production window to post-production window to distribution window, and it can be seamless. And who knows, maybe you do make a great movie and you bring it to a festival and a huge company wants to buy it. You have the opportunity at that moment to decide what's best for the movie. Someone like us doesn't lock you in and say, sorry, no, you're only with us. But you've at least given yourself the opportunity then to decide if that offer is the right offer for you or not. You're not just taking what the market has told you your movie's worth. So point is, we think what we have is a you know a solution for a challenging space, but it comes with a premium, so you just have to understand. And what we do that's different than other service providers is that we are full scale, footprint, and across all rights. So what that means is when you can hire other service providers to put your movie into theaters. You can hire a film hub or another aggregator to get your movie up on digital platforms. You might have to hire someone else to bring your movie to Netflix and try to license it to them. There's nobody, as far as we understand, I'm pretty sure I'm right. There's nobody that does all of that under the same model, and that's what Blue Harbor is. So when you're paying to hire us, we're working on your movie, soup to nuts, across all windows, all rights, monetizing everything we can, all under the same model, and all for 2 years, which is our initial term. Which at the end of 2 years, you have the option to take your rights back. You're not stuck in a 25-year license term. And the only difference between, or one of the major differences between us and someone like FilmHub, again, is that it's full scale and you're dealing with myself and my two partners. You're not dealing with, as you said, a website. Again, I think FilmHub is great. It's a really great means to an end. And the other companies that do something similar, it's a great means to an end for filmmakers to get their movies out there. But at the end of the day, you probably want to be talking to somebody. You want to be having somebody that you can call and say, "Hey, Seth, what's happening with X, Y, and Z?" Or "Hey, when can we expect this?" Hey, whatever. You want to talk to somebody, and so it's kind of the beauty of how we operate.
Nice, nice. And I will echo that frustrations with Film Hub as like a website. I've definitely experienced that. Like, uh, you know, uploading to their website and then trying to follow up with questions. Very difficult to get a response. And when you do get a response, you can kind of tell it's from an individual who is, well, just by like the time zones, by when they're responding and the names in the signature, you can tell it's in a, what's the word? A wholesale like office where they're renting out human services for multiple companies. And that's not great for when it comes to actual quality assurance. And that kind of one-on-one is something that I'm definitely appreciative of. But anyway, I don't want to sound like I'm like wholesale endorsing Blue Harbor. I'm trying to maintain a little bit of journalistic integrity.
And listen, and I certainly don't want anyone to listen to this and say, "Oh, well, you only talked bad about Film Hub." I think they're great. They are a service that fills a need for filmmakers. You
Mhm,
use it yourself. It's a means to an end. I know plenty of people that are very happy with them.
mhm.
So yeah, I think myself, my company included, it's important to have places like these to be options for filmmakers to get their movies out there versus
Mhm.
feeling like they're SOL, as you're saying, because there are other options there. So yeah, I think they do a great job. I have a lot of friends that work there, and but yeah, I think at the end of the day, you want someone to talk to, and you want there to be levels of transparency with all of it.
You mentioned genre. I'll ask, what genres do you find are selling well right now? And I say right now because from the career I've seen, there's always like a shift where, someone sees like, oh, something's selling really well at AFM, and then 2 years later, there's a deluge of that genre or that kind of content, and then it stops selling well because there's so many people who are now making content or making films in that space and in that genre. What do you find is selling well right now in terms of which genres?
I mean, horror continues to be, kind of the go-to space, and that's across kind of, any which type of any type of release strategy. Theatrically, it's been such a great run for the last 2 years in the space, and as a genre nerd, I'm really happy to, to see the success, but also see these incredible stories. I mean, that something like Weapons was so, awesome. But yeah, so horror, the floor is always so high for how those types of movies, in that space perform. Um, from a home entertainment focus, for films that are on like digital platforms, action thrillers are always really, really strong. Those are always very consistent performers. And again, if there's a level of cast in there, they perform even, more strongly. But what's been great about Harbor is that, we're working on such a diverse slate of movies that we're seeing different performances from different, genres that I think I normally would have said, no, I wouldn't expect it to be so strong. But we released a movie earlier this year called A Nice Indian Boy, which is a gay romantic comedy, but really, really well made movie. Really, sweet movie that just was the right kind of movie for the time, and people, are very, very appreciative of it and really love it. And I think it just speaks to it's kind of a well made movie with the genre. Maybe it isn't what is the most desired, but you know finding its audience in a tougher time. And so, past that, there's just other genres that we see that if they're marketed well and are hitting an audience at a time where something's important to them, there's always going to be some ability to succeed. So yeah, it's easy to kind of throw things into buckets and say, yeah, all right, horror, action, thriller, great, and to my point before, those are what the genres that the other independent companies are looking for. But just because you don't want to make a movie that has just those genres doesn't mean that you're the death sentence, right? There are definitely ways to make great movies that are documentaries, that are comedies, that are dramas. Just goes to my point before, who are you making the movie for? You have to understand your audience.
Yeah, I could keep talking to you for another hour, but I want to be respectful of time. So I'll just ask if you could go back to when you were interning at Lionsgate or assistant at Lionsgate, what advice would you give yourself?
Hang in there, just continue to do what you're doing, because I it does feel long and challenging, in those early days, where how am I ever going to get to do the things that I want to be doing, and not to speak ill, because it's like I was reading scripts and watching movies, as I said before, so like that was great, but yeah, I think everyone wants to be doing a little bit more and be more involved, but clearly for me, as I sit back and reflect now, it's like every step of this has been meaningful and built me into the executive I am now. And I think without like missing some of those steps, who knows if I'm where I'm at. And so I think that all has just kind of worked in concert to get me where I am. And so again, I really appreciate all of the different phases I've gone through. So I think with anyone that's gonna in an early stage of their career, you just hang in there and do the best that you can. Take advantage of your opportunities.
Awesome.
And that is Season 3, Episode 16 of the Producers Lounge podcast. Thank you to my guest, Seth Needle, for joining us. You can find out more about him by checking out the show notes and subscribing to our YouTube channel at Greater Grander, where we'll be hosting our video exclusive of the chat. Our intro and outro music today was Kumasi Groove by Kevin MacLeod. Our episode still image is by Ricardo Tomas on Greater and Grander. We'd love to hear from you, and you can check out this week's accompanying article on greaterandgrander.com entitled 8 Books You Must Read, Lessons for Advocates Who Want to Stand Out. Link in the show notes. You can stay up to date by following us on YouTube and social media at the handle Greater Grander, all one word. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever fine podcasts are found. And also, if you like what we do, share this podcast with a friend who you think will enjoy it. Join us next week for more cocktails and questions, and until then, keep producing dreams.